Aora, a world where mortals live, die, and are reborn through the turning of the wheel. The cycle of reincarnation watched over by the gods, and made possible through pillars of a mystical substance known as Audra. 5 years ago, you traveled from your home to the Deerwood, a nation that had waged war against the incarnated god of light, Aethys, resulting in his destruction. The country suffered from a plague of hollowborn, infants born without souls, that many believed was punishment for killing a god. In an ancient, secluded ruin, you witnessed a secret ritual that inadvertently transformed you into a watcher. One who can see and speak with souls. The ritual also gave you horrible visions, waking nightmares of a past life that threatened your sanity. To put them to rest, you pursued the man who had led the ritual, a seemingly immortal agent of the gods, known as Theos Ix Arcanon. With divine assistance, you confronted and defeated Theos, ending your visions and resolving the Hollowborn crisis. In so doing, you also learned the great secret that Theos had protected. That the ancient empire of Anguith had transformed themselves into gods. Your visions finally put to rest, you retired to the castle of Cadnua, built atop a massive statue of pure Audra, where you ruled in relative peace and prosperity.
Made a nice story. You fixing up that old keep, lifting the curse. Must have told it 100 times. But something got to gnawing at me. Thinking the spirits there weren't really at rest. That maybe the gods weren't finished with us. I used to dream that when my god came back, he would forgive us. Last the trouble with dreams. Sooner or later, we all have to wake up.
What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you our story of Pillars of Eternity 2 Deadfire story series. As the intro should have explained to you, basically Pillars of Eternity 2 Deadfire takes place 5 years after the original game, and in the interim, the Watcher, the protagonist of the first game, had been enjoying life in Cadnua, the keep that he took over in the first game. However, at some point, again as the cinematic should have shown you, the statue beneath Cadnua, known as Marosnua, I think is how it's pronounced, but the statue basically, is possessed by some being, pops up out of the land, and kills you outright. And the game picks up pretty much right there, actually. Now, jumping into this, just to give a couple quick caveats, while this is the story series for the second game, I am going to be spoiling the crap out of the first game because the second game here is like a direct continuation of that storyline in a lot of ways. So there's no real way to talk about the story of this game without spoiling the first game, just to give you a bit of a heads up. Now also, we are basically going to be covering the critical path of the game, which is to say the main plot. We're not going to be covering a ton of side quests or any of the DLCs really. There is an important thing that happens in one of the DLCs that I will explain towards the end of the story series because that's where it's going to fit in. And it is relevant to the plot of these games, so that's the only reason I'm mentioning it. But we're not going to be covering a ton of the side content. However, We will be covering it a little bit in a few places because there is a point where you kind of have to do some of the side quests in the game to carry on the plot. And lastly, I just want to say that Deadfire is probably my second favorite CRPG style game of all time. I'm a huge fan of it. I've played it quite a bit. It is a game I have 100%ed, despite people constantly calling me a turn-based shill. I actually love the real-time with pause. Though, that said, they did add a turn-based mode into Pillars of Eternity 2 here. However, we're going to be playing real-time with pause because that's the way this game was designed, and frankly, because of that, I think it plays better in that mode. Let's actually get into it here. So the game starts after those cinematics and story intros with us being a spirit walking along the wheel. We can walk down this path. It's going to show us some events from the first game, actually, before we make our way to Barath. Now, Barath is actually the god of death. She takes on two forms, the Usher and the Pallid Knight. The Usher is an old dwarven guy. I think he's dwarven. But he's an old guy, and then the Pallid Knight is the female version clad in black armor. You come across Barath in this sort of beyond area, I think they call it the in-between, and she is at a desk going over tarot cards and tells you to sit down. So Barath kind of explains the situation here. That statue was possessed by the dead god Eothas. Eothas was the god of light before he was killed in the Saints' War, which is an event that happened prior to the first game, actually. And while Barath and the other gods know that Eothas is definitely the one who possessed this statue, they don't know what he's doing or why. So what they're asking you to do is to track down Eothas and try to figure out what it is he's doing and why he's taking this physical shape on Eora. I just want to mention real quick before we get into the nuts and bolts of this that you can actually decline this request, and if you do, you die and the game ends, and that's it. I just thought it was funny that they added that in. Because, as I mentioned, this is a direct continuation of the first game, Obsidian actually worked in several methods to create your story from the first game and carry it over the second one here. The way this works is it's actually more of a world state than anything else. It doesn't affect any of the main plot lines, but if you import a save from the first game, or if you make a custom decision save, I think that was an option. I don't know if they still do that, but at one point you could make a custom save through decision making on a website, and then they would give you the save file for that, then you could import it that way. I don't know if that's available anymore, but it used to be a thing. Or you can pick one of the 6, I believe, options of general paths through the game, the first game that you could have taken. Now again, these are just kind of world states. They don't make a huge difference. It's more of how certain characters feel about you, or in some cases whether or not some characters are alive or not. And that's probably the biggest decision you're going to make out of this, is depending on your choices you made in the first game, some of these characters can just straight up not be, living. That's probably the biggest change that can happen through this choice. Barath essentially gives you the choice to import that save or pick a world state predetermined by Obsidian and move on with the game, and then from there it goes on to character creation. I've actually covered that a bit more in depth in an old video of mine, so I'm not really going to go over it here, but I'll try to link that down below if I remember it. And then, once all that's out of the way, Barath sends us on our way to reunite our soul with our body a little farther up down the path. Now we come to on a ship with our good companion, Adair, in a seat near our unconscious body. Now, Adair kind of fills in some of the gaps where basically they could tell you weren't completely dead, and that the farther Eothas' statue was getting from you, the less life you had in you. So they chartered a ship and started following this giant statue all the way to the Deadfire archipelago and away from the Deerwood where you were when this started. Now, in the middle of this, a ship member, or crewmate, or a member of the crew, from the ship you're on, bursts into the room and asks to speak with you, because apparently you were made the captain despite you being unconscious. And basically he's saying that you guys are being docked by pirates who are looking to parley with the captain, which is you. So you go outside, you find out that, exactly that, you're being attacked by pirates. So there's a conversation regardless of what option you pick speech-wise, you will always be attacked right here. However, the leader says he's going to leave his pirates to take over your ship, and then he's going to sail off. Now, there's a storm happening while all this goes down. This is your first fight. Once you kill off all of these pirates, the storm overtakes the ship, and the ship wrecks. There is a little text event where you can either save a supply crate or a crew member. It's not a big decision, but there you go. Either way, the storm wrecks your ship, and all of you and your ship wash up ashore on an island. Now you come to Adair and the steward of Cadnua, which is the talking head statue from the first game that inhabited the keep of Cadnua, who also came with you, because why not, are washed up on the beach as well, and they tell you that they don't really know where you are, but it's likely that there's a Valent settlement nearby, Valent being one of the cultures of the world of Aora, and that basically you should gather what survivors you can and then see if there's a settlement you can head by. And so you can do exactly that. You can, real quick, while you're on the beach, gather up all the survivors, which I recommend you do, and then you head out to Port Maj. So in order to do that, you have to head to the world map. Now, the world map here functions much differently than the first game. So on Deadfire, it's an archipelago, so there's going to be ship stuff going on later, but right now we're landlocked on this island. However, you can freely move about the world map, which was not the case in the first game. You could only travel from point A to point B. Here, you can move around freely. That said, because we're locked onto this island, there's really not that much to go explore at the moment. So the main thing you really want to do is head straight for Port Maj, which is pretty much due north of where you are now. Now, when we arrive, there's going to be a scene going on between the settlers of the Valent settlers and the local Amawa. And basically, there's some sort of agreement between the two, and it seems to be grating here lately. And upon your arrival, the governor, Clario, realizes that you were probably attacked by pirates and asks for your help because you are an outsider. He asks you to come speak with him at his estate. So if you follow him and go speak with him, he explains that he can have the resources to get your ship up and running again. However, he needs help with a certain matter because, you know, obviously he's going to get some work out of you too. So Clario explains that the reason they are settling this island is because that the Valent Trading Company, which is to say the Valent faction, is settling the Deadfire archipelago to look for a substance called Luminous Audra, which Audra should have been mentioned in the pre-cinematics here that we watched, so I'm not going to go over it again. But basically, it harbors soul energy, and animancers study it and manipulate that soul energy into new technology. Now, Old Vela is using this because the Deadfire archipelago is so rich in Audra as a research site. However, after that storm, which wrecked a bunch of ships along with pirate problems, as long as the local problems are going on with the Amawa as well, he basically needs you to go investigate a nearby Nguithan dig site and see why he hasn't heard from his animancers or researchers there. And worst case scenario, he needs you to recover the head animancer, Odysseus, I don't know exactly how to pronounce it. But either way, he needs you to get that guy's notes, worst case scenario. And that's pretty much what we need to do in Port Maj. Now, from here, before we actually leave, we can pick up our second companion, the first being Adair, of course. Our second companion can be Joti, or Joti, X-O-T-I, I don't know how to pronounce that. I'm terrible with pronunciations. She is actually a priestess of Gon. Now, Gon is actually an aspect of Aothis. Aothis, being the god of light and life and redemption, has a darker side to him, and that is, you know, death and stuff resulting in rebirth. Gon is kind of the darker depiction of Aothis, but that is what Jodi is a priestess of, and she can accompany you because she sees it as her job to help shepherd lost souls into the afterlife. And because there's so much death following this storm and all this, that, you know, she wants to go do that and offers to come with you. Now, once we get to the Nguithan dig site, in the middle of that map, basically, there's a bunch of monsters guarding a weird-looking cage of sorts. Now, once we get all of those monsters cleared out, we find them inside of that weird cage, where they had basically locked themselves in it to save themselves from these monsters. And they explain that while they were studying animancy and stuff, that suddenly all the nearby animals just went crazy and attacked them and basically wiped the settlement out. And then all this storm came through, plus Aothis, the giant statue, like literally stepped through this dig site. So they've had a lot going on. And after you've freed them, they ask you to go down below where most of the research was happening and look for their leader, the Odysseus guy. Now before we do that, they offer you the service of one of their animancers called Ingirth. However, you recognize that this is not actually who that is, because the person standing before you is none other than Aloth, one of the other companions from the first game, who you haven't seen in many years. He silently kind of like, hey, don't blow my covers you, and you can choose to either blow his cover or not. It doesn't really matter much here, to be honest. But then Aloth will accompany your party to help search, and basically he's like, listen, I'll explain what's going on with this in a little bit, but right now we need to focus on the immediate problem. And then Aloth can join you. And that's all of the companions you can get on Port Mage that aren't generic. So you can go to the tavern in Port Mage and hire adventurers, which are just generic NPCs really that can come along and help you out. Which, if you're playing on Path of the Damned, I actually do recommend you do that, because it will make some of these fights a little easier if you have a full group of 5. Now, from here we drop down into the actual dig site level of the Ingwithin dig site. We fight through a bunch of monsters to the far side of the area, where we're going to find a Pillar of Adra, and the corpse in front of it is none other than the head researcher guy. Now we can find his notes on him, which we were supposed to get for Governor Clario, as well as commune with the Adra statue when we get close to it, inadvertently through our powers as a Watcher. For those who have forgotten, our character is a Watcher. That is to say that we are a Watcher of souls, as again, the intro cinematic should have explained, but just to say it again. Essentially, a Watcher can see past the shroud of the world and see souls, and those souls can see them back. And through that, they can gain a lot of knowledge and solve a lot of mysteries that other people can't even begin. However, they are prone to going crazy. You solved all that, though, in the first game. Now, through your ability as a Watcher, and the fact that Adra is basically a conduit for soul energy, Watchers and Adra kind of have a weird connection. So you find this Adra pillar and you start communing with it. Inadvertently, it just kind of happens. So before you know it, you find yourself in direct contact with Aothis in an area called the Beyond. So basically you're kind of like astral planeswalking, talking to this guy through the Adra pillar. And while he doesn't really give you much information, he basically explains that there's no need to worry. He's got something going on and planned that's going to help everyone. However, he has to do all this, terrible stuff with stomping through the world, destroying things in the meantime. But in his own words, something beautiful is coming. And then, before you have a chance to really follow up on that, he severs the connection that was made through the Adra pillar, and he's moving on. Now, through this conversation, we do actually garner that he is drawing energy from these Adra pillars, which is a very important part of the story later. But he's very clearly drawing energy from the souls that are trapped and being used by the conduits in the Adra. So we come back to ourselves, and we can take our notes that we found and newfound information and leave the Ingwithin dig site. From here we head back to Port Mage, speak to Governor Clario, who we can either give the notes to or not. You can choose to keep them. I don't remember offhand what this affects, but I don't remember it being particularly important either. And then once this is complete and you've freed the animancers that are still alive at the dig site, Clario will send the appropriate forces to help get your ship back into the sea. So from here you head back to the beach to the south, and then once you get there, your ship will be sea ready and you can actually get on it and leave this island. Here's a fun part. This part of the game is where you find out that ship management is going to be a part of this game. So the Deadfire is like a whole pirate theme to it, and part of that is commanding your own ship. This involves having sailors to sail said ship, as well as keeping it stocked and ready to sail, as well as text-based ship battles. Now I say text-based, but it's only like half true. If you run into another ship and you wish to attack it, you can do that, and you can play out like text-based battles and attack them that way. However, if you choose the ram option and you actually close the distance through the text event and eventually ram them, you can then board their ship and then have an actual combat, which I recommend doing if you actually play this game. because the text-based versions of those attacks are awful. But if you ignore all of that and just full speed ahead ram their boat with yours, and then board their boat, you can actually wrap that stuff up a lot quicker. But that's just a quick aside. Now that we are able to leave the island that had Port Mage on it, once we start sailing, you're going to be immediately accosted by a ship that is impossible to outrun. And I know it's impossible because they've literally coded it that way. People kept finding ways around it and they kept fixing it. It was a whole thing. You are confronted by a Captain Ferrante of the Principe. Principe? I don't know exactly how to pronounce it. Like I said, I'm terrible at those. But basically, the Principe are pirates. They are pirates from Old Vela. Captain Ferrante explains that he's a member of the old guard of sorts, so to speak, of the Principe, and that the pirate that attacked you earlier is none other than Captain Binwith of the Drake. Captain Ferrante is not a big fan of Binwith or Binwith's master, Aeldus. Ferrante apologizes for the blatant attack that Binwith had on your ship earlier, and if you would like to track Binwith down, he's going to lend you the services of his best ship hunter, Seraphin. Seraphin is an Orlan cipher. A cipher deals in mind magic, thus making them great at doing things like tracking down ships. Seraphin will give you a side quest to infiltrate Fort Deadlight, where Captain Binwith, the pirate that attacked you earlier, is actually from. With all that out of the way, when we turned in our quest for the Nguithan dig site earlier, Clario told us that the next place we should go to track down Aothis, because we explained that that's what we're trying to do, Clario explains that what you need to do is you need to sail north to Nekataka. Nekataka is the capital of the Deadfire archipelago, because in order to basically do anything more around here, you're going to need the permission, so to speak, of the Queen of the Deadfire archipelago, Queen Onikaza II. So that is our next destination. Now, while we're sailing north, we are going to hit a bit of an event of sorts, where we will be accosted on our ship by the gods. You'll basically start hearing some bells ring, and then you'll find yourself in the in-between talking to several of the gods. And basically, they want a progress report on what you've learned about Aothis. And you can tell them that, essentially, what we've already found out, Aothis is clearly drawing on the Adra. He's headed for more Adra pillars. We gathered that much when we were speaking to him earlier. However, his exact motives for this are unclear. The gods seem confused that he's not trying to retake his place, because if you remember, he's been gone for a while. They thought he was dead, like completely gone. However, now that he's back, they assumed he was going to want to retake his place among the other gods, which he doesn't seem to be doing. And they start debating whether or not to just outright destroy the world to kill him. But ultimately, they decide to wait and see if you can't ascertain exactly what it is he's trying to do before they do anything. And that is where we are going to leave part 1. So we found ourselves in the Deadfire archipelago after our keep in Cadnua was destroyed by Aothis inhabiting a statue of Marosnua. We were attacked by pirates after we almost died from the attack on our keep. The pirates, as well as a storm, caused us to be shipwrecked on an island. We went to Port Mage to help get that situation sorted out. Did exactly that, got our help getting our ship back to being seaworthy, and now we are headed north to Nekataka to speak to the Queen of the Deadfire Archipelago for A, permission to, actually be here, and 2, to see if perhaps she or anyone in her kingdom has had reports of where Aothis might have went. So there you go, guys. That is part 1 of the story of Pillars of Eternity 2 Deadfire. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please like, comment, subscribe. All those things really help the channel out. We're growing every day. Can't thank you enough. Nonetheless, thank you for watching. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day. What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you part 2 of our Pillars of Eternity 2 Deadfire story series. In our last episode, we successfully got our ship fixed and were able to leave the island of Port Mage. And we were headed towards Nekataka. Now, I do want to mention, while we are headed to Nekataka for the sake of the story, you aren't actually required to go there. The game actually gets pretty open world at this point, and you are able to go wherever you please, provided, you have the skills to get by. again, following the critical path here, we're going to go ahead and head to Nekataka. So Nekataka is the main capital of the Deadfire archipelago that is just north a bit of Port Mage. Upon arrival, we will be confronted by the harbor master, who will basically have questions about why we're there. And when we try to explain that we are the Herald of Barath and we need to speak to the Queen, we basically get laughed at until Barath herself steps in and kind of forces you to scare the entire dock with ghosts. Which of course both proves you are a watcher to most of the city who's going to be hearing about this, as well as scaring the harbor master off and leaving you to your own devices. Now at this point we can explore the city if we want. It is comprised of about 5 different maps that you can travel in between. You can encounter random encounters while you travel in between them. We are headed for the topmost of these districts called Serpent's Crown, where the Kahanga Palace is. Now once we arrive at the Kahanga Palace, we of course go inside and we sort of interrupt a meeting between the Queen and 2 factions that we'll be interacting with. Rawatai, the Royal Deadfire Company that is, and the Valent Trading Company from Old Vela. Now upon your entry, the Queen will actually speak telepathically to you, somehow knows you're a watcher already, and basically gives you the floor because she's aware you're a watcher and is aware that you probably have some sort of news about the giant stomping through the land, which is what these 2 are here to complain about. So, while you explain that you actually know what this Titan is up to, you will find out that in addition to Port Mage suffering the effects of Aothis stomping through the land, a Rawatai fort known as Hasango has also been destroyed, basically. What'll happen here is that ultimately the Queen will tell you that she's going to send you to Hasango to find out what happened, which should appease these 2, as well as fulfill your personal goal of tracking Aothis down, because there is an Adra lighthouse there, which we should be able to commune with to again speak with Aothis like we did at the Ingwithan dig site just a bit ago. Now this is the part where we are going to pick up the rest of the actual companions. We get another companion for each of the factions that we have left. So, and keep in mind, you can of course turn these down. You don't have to take these people with you. But the Royal Deadfire Company will give you the services of Maya, who is the sister of Kana from the first game. The Valent Trading Company will give you the services of Palagina, who was also a companion from the first game. And then the Huana, that is to say Queen Onikaza and her tribe, will direct you to go pick up a water shaper known as Tekehu, who is a water godlike, as well as a druid. Now I do want to mention real quick, because this is where it makes the most sense to do so, while that wraps up all of the actual companions, you can find several more characters that are known as sidekicks from here. Sidekicks are recruitable people who have a unique experience and story, and they are usually tied to one very specific quest for each of them, as opposed to having a line of quests and dialogue and stuff that the actual companions do. Think of them as a tier slightly in between full-blown companion and randomly recruited adventurer through an inn. Now, while we have our quest to go to Hasango to continue tracking down Aothis, chances are, at this point in the game, you will more than likely not be able to head straight there. This is normally where you would do side quests. But because we are following the main path, we are going to basically go straight to Hasango. However, I do want to mention that this is normally where you would start interacting with the factions, which is to say the Huana, which is Queen Onikaza and her stuff, the Royal Deadfire Company, the Valent Trading Company, as well as the Principe. This is important because those are factions that we can use for a part of the story later. You can side with them, shall we say. However, we're not going to jump into that right now. We're going to discuss all of that in detail when we actually get to that point in the story. For right now, all we need to technically do is go to Hasango and see what happened there. So, using the magic of YouTube, we're jumping forward to Hasango. Now, when we arrive, we obviously notice that the fort is destroyed, but we pretty much knew that was the case before we ever showed up. In a building nearby, we can talk to some survivors who will explain what happened. After Aothis came through and the Royal Deadfire Company tried to fight him and failed and were ultimately killed, most of them anyway. After that happened, the Naga came, for whatever reason mopped up as many of the survivors as they could find, as well as took over the lighthouse that we need to get to. Now from here what we're trying to do is simply get across this map to the Adra lighthouse. There is some stuff you can do in between, And the most important thing is find the spirit of a dead Naga nearby. So that's, I mean, you don't have to do it, but that's probably the only thing of note worth mentioning in this particular walkthrough. So from there, once we actually get to the Adra Lighthouse, we can confront the Naga leader, Sagan, or Sugan maybe. This is important because we don't have to kill him. If we interacted with the soul, the Naga soul earlier that I just mentioned, and then we go talk to Sagan, we can actually convince him to not fight us and just let us commune with the Adra. Because he explains that his people are here trying to fix the Adra. Because when Eothas came through, he sucked all the souls out of it and it seemingly turned off, which is a problem, because of course souls pass through Adra pillars. If you say that you're a watcher and you're here to help, he'll ask you to prove it, and you can pull forth that Naga soul that we met earlier, and basically prove to Sagan that we're not here to fight the guy. Or, alternatively, you can just kill all of them, as, you know, is your want. But you don't have to, I guess is my point. Now, when we commune with the Adra Pillar, and thus commune with Eothas again as he's walking through the oceans, we get a bit more information, and that is to say that what is happening as he's passing through places is he's tethering himself to luminous Adra Pillars and pulling the souls out of them. As long as he does that, he doesn't need to pull souls from creatures around him. The reason you died when he first came to was he pulled the souls from people around him, which kills them, of course, because, you know, he's pulling their souls out. And he uses that to power the Titan to get where he's going. But if he attaches himself to luminous Adra Pillars, he doesn't need to do that. He can just take the souls of people who are already dead. Either way, though, still not a great option. Well, he explains that he doesn't really have time to talk right now, because otherwise the tether will snap and he'll be forced to kill more living people to keep going. If you meet him at a place he calls the Ashen Maw, he can speak to you again. And there, he says he'll explain his purpose. Now, after this, we can speak to the Naga leader Sugan again, and again make the choice to kill him or not, or let him go. If we let him go, he says he's going to go tell his people about this very strange interaction he had with humans, or just people in general, really. And once we leave, Hasanga will be immediately confronted by the Royal Deadfire Company and their main head guy, Atsura. Atsura will basically thank you for freeing Hasango from the Naga, and direct you back to the palace. Now, it's worth noting that technically the next step in this is actually not necessary to go straight back to the palace. You can just head straight for the Ashen Maw if you're high enough level. But again, you likely won't be, because this is where doing more side quests would normally come in. For the sake of this video, we are going to go ahead and head back to the palace in Serpent's Crown in Nekataka. And we're going to go speak with Queen Onikaza II again. But on our way there, we'll be stopped by the gods for a second time, just like when we left Port Mage. This time, the gods will basically do the exact same thing they did the first time. They'll debate at attacking Eothas outright, decide that they're going to wait to see what he's actually up to first. You tell the gods that he is headed towards the Ashen Maw in Magrin's Teeth, which is a volcanic mountain range to the north of the Deadfire archipelago. They decide not to do anything just yet, but then ultimately tell you to follow him and see what he's up to. So our next goal, as they put it, is to go to the Ashen Maw. But like I said, we're going to go speak to Onikaza first, and once we get there, she can give us a little more information about Magrin's Teeth, which is the mountain range, as well as the Ashen Maw. It is home to a race that Magrin made, known as the Rathun, which are giant fire godlike. And she suspects that even if they don't manage to kill Eothas, Eothas will kill them, thus ridding her of another enemy. And then she gives us a side quest to go speak to her Water Shapers Guild in the city of Nekataka, because she hasn't heard from their leader recently. That is where we are going to wrap up part 2. So in this particular part, which wasn't particularly long, but nonetheless, we arrived in Nekataka, spoke to the main factions of the game, who send us, the Watcher, on a mission to Hasango to find out what happened to it. We discovered the Naga were trying to reactivate the Adra Pillar there after Eothas came through and destroyed the place. We reactivate the Adra Pillar and dealt with the Naga however we so chose. And then we found out that Eothas was pulling souls from these people, which we kind of already knew, and that he's headed towards the Ashen Maw, which is our next objective. With that out of the way, the next act will also be a little short, but then after that, the last episode should be very long. A little bit of a spoiler here, more so than this part was designed to tell you anyway, is that after the interaction in the Ashen Maw, you can choose to side with factions, or you can choose to go it alone. I'm going to try to cover all of that for the sake of covering the story, in the last part where all of it is the most relevant. So the second and the third part here will be a little short, but then the fourth part and fourth and final part, much like the first part, should actually be fairly long. So with that out of the way, thank you guys so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. The channel is doing incredibly well. Obviously, I couldn't do that without you guys watching this stuff, so just honestly, thank you so much. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day. What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you part 3 of our Pillars of Eternity 2 Deadfire series. In the last episode, we successfully liberated Hasango from the clutches of the Naga after the Aothis statue had come through, and we learned a little more about where he was heading, which happened to be the Ashen Maw in the Magran's Teeth volcanic mountain range to the north end of the map. Now, using the magic of YouTube, we've arrived at the Ashen Maw. The first thing we're really going to notice when we walk into Ashen Maw is that we can see Aothis at an Adra pillar in the background. And while there's not much we can do about it, it does set a nice tone for what this area is all about. Now, as we're crossing the bridge here, we're going to find a Rathun warrior. The Rathun are giant fire godlike that are very dedicated to Magran. And we learned from this warrior that Aothis killed a lot of them when he was headed for the Adra pillar here. Now, once we enter the keep proper, we can have a full conversation with a couple of Rathun that aren't actually dying as we speak to them, and they tell us that we can find a Rathun warlord below, and that we can find Magran's shrine as well. And in order to reach Aothis, we're going to have to find the shrine. And basically, while the Rathun are a warrior race who would normally kill us for simply setting foot here, they've quite frankly taken too many casualties for this to be much of a big deal at the moment. So basically, they're going to let you go and speak to the warlord. Now, once we go down the stairs from here, we're going to come across a bit of a crossroads after a big fight at said crossroads, where we can enter either a cave or a keep. Now, truthfully, it doesn't actually matter which one of these you enter first, but for the sake of consistency, we are going to enter the keep first. The keep is known as Jagged Keep, and all we're really going to do here is take one of a couple paths to reach the warlord on the other side of this map. The warlord is actually at the shrine to Magran, which is where we need to be anyway. Now, there's essentially two paths here. There is a third branch, but essentially there's two paths. You can take the middle path, which involves you fighting a bunch of Rathun who are hostile, or you can take the right path if you have the appropriate skills that will let you sneak by and not actually kill any of them. The branch off to the left as you walk into the room will actually lead you to a fight with Rathun if you go there first, but there is a key in that room which will unlock a couple of the doors and save you some hassle if you don't have the mechanic skill to pick any of the locks in here. Once we reach the warlord on the other side, we can have a conversation with him. Now, this is where we need to basically make a decision about if we're going to kill all of these Rathun or not. Now, personally, I recommend you don't kill them. However, if you just want to, you can kill all of these warlords and the Rathun that are around him, as well as the Rathun on your way in here. However, I recommend you don't, because if you instead choose to make a deal with the warlord here, he will A, give you some more information, but B, he'll also give you a buff for when we circle back to that cave I mentioned in just a little bit. So if we choose to talk to the warlord here before just attacking outright, he will explain that the shrine he is at will lower you down to where Aothis is so you could speak to him. However, the shrine will only lower you down if you have the torque of a word I'm not even going to try to pronounce, but you need a special torque that activates the shrine, which is essentially an elevator, that will take you down. However, the torque is in a cave nearby, the cave at the crossroads that I mentioned. The warlord will also tell us that the reason that they're waiting on this, because they were intending to rally their forces and push one last time against Aothis, who is defiling their sacred mountain, is simply that they are trying to awaken their ancient ally, who he goes on to explain is actually a dragon. The warlord here sends his priest, a Brinthus as they call it, to summon this dragon, because this dragon is supposed to be their ancient ally. It is at this point, if you chose to talk to these guys instead of outright kill them, that the warlord here will command his shaman to cast a fire protection spell on you, which is very handy, especially if you plan on fighting the dragon. And then, you could get that and then circle back and then still kill the Rathun if you really wanted to. But in addition to this, once we've had this conversation, if we agree to help the warlord and we didn't kill any of those Rathun on the way in, they all become neutral and we don't have to fight any of them anymore. From here, we're going to double back to that crossroads I mentioned earlier, and we're going to head into the cave this time. Now, the map in here is actually relatively small. There's a fight or two on it, and then we'll eventually come upon a Rathoon soul nearby a living Rathoon. So the Rathoon soul will explain that it was killed by the dragon that is in here. And once we move forward a little bit, because the living Rathoon does not have much to say, the dragon itself will bring itself forward in quite the spectacular entrance, to be honest. So the dragon's name is Jadafurlus. So basically, it will go on to explain that it's a bit of an opportunist. It won't actually say these things, but this is really what I got from the conversation. Essentially, this dragon made a deal with the Rathoon's ancestors, where as long as they kept it fed and everything, it would come to their aid in times of need. The dragon, realizing it's not about to kill a god, or even try to, decided it wasn't going to help the Rathoon with this, and just started killing them when it came to summon them, because it felt like it was a slight against the dragon's pride to do so. Now, this is, again, where you can choose to either kill the dragon or talk your way out of this situation. You don't have to fight this dragon if you don't want to. The reason for doing so that you might want to is A, because it's clearly not a nice person, or, sentient being, shall we say. But moreover, is the dragon here has a horde. As long as you are not in stealth and you want to just loot that stuff, the dragon will attack you if you try to take any of it. And there's actually some really good, unique items in that horde that you should definitely get. Now, truth be told, you can not kill the dragon and still get those by simply entering sneak mode and then stealing the stuff. It's actually not that difficult. In either scenario, you're either going to have to kill the dragon and then retrieve the torque that you're here after to activate the shrine in the keep from the dead Brinthus nearby, or you're going to have to talk to the dragon and convince it to give you the torque by basically insulting its pride. So the torque is like an object for Magrin. And if you explain that to the dragon, it'll be like, I don't need the idol of some god, that kind of thing. And it'll essentially let you take the torque without having to fight the thing. However, alternatively, you can, of course, just fight the dragon, and then you can take the torque and everything in its hoard to yourself without much of a fuss, provided you have the ability to kill the thing. Now, once we've successfully retrieved the torque from the dragon, or rather the dragon's lair, we can head back to the shrine in the keep. Now at this point, once we have the torque, we can explain what happened to the warlord. He'll be disappointed, but not particularly surprised, at which point he will move out of your way so you can use the shrine. And upon using it, you will be contacted by Magrin. If you're unaware, Magrin is the goddess of trials and fire and stuff. She will explain to you that she is going to blow up this volcano in an effort to stop Aothis. So, maybe you should leave. Obviously, being in a little too deep at this point, this conversation is fairly short-lived, and you will descend down to speak to Aothis. This is actually a really cool conversation, and it's a bigger part of the game, and it comes with a huge lore reveal. Now, it is worth mentioning that Aothis here does have companion-specific dialogue for some of your companions if they're with you. Jody and Adir, being the, of course, closest to Aothis in terms of worship, have very important things to say, and that's kind of who I'd recommend you have with you, but he does have dialogue that changes depending on who you have with you. This is where he gives you the big lore reveal. Aothis finally explains what he's doing, why he's hauling this Adra statue across the oceans of the Deadfire archipelago here, and where he's going and what he's planning to do. Aothis is planning on revealing the gods for what they are, frauds. As we learned in Pillars of Eternity, the gods aren't real in the traditional sense. The ancient Nguithan society, when looking for the real gods, found that there was none, or rather, if there was, they left a long time ago, and realizing that the world as a whole is going to have trouble coming to terms with that, they decided to make themselves gods. And as we learned from Aothis here, that was done through the use of machinery. Nguithans used actual machinery to take control of the wheel. The wheel is a natural metaphysical process we'll have learned up to this point, by now I'm sure, where souls of the world get reincarnated and kind of pass through from life to life. The Nguithans, again, took that machinery, used it to take control of the wheel, used the power this gave them to install themselves as gods. Aothis plans on revealing this to the world, basically, and he's planning on doing this by going to a place called Ukaizo and breaking this machinery. Because again, the machinery that gives the gods this control over the wheel is a very real thing. And it is machinery that is protected by several of the gods' failsafes, in particular Andra's mortar, Magrin's teeth, which is where we are now, along the edge of it, as well as a couple of other things. But essentially, Eothas has revealed his plan. He is planning on heading to the island of Ukaizo, in a very difficult to reach for mortals area of the world, where the physical machinery that the gods use to take control of the wheel is located. Eothas plans on going there and breaking it. Essentially, this is going to break the wheel. And I say break the wheel because while all this machinery technically did was take control of the wheel for the gods, it's worth noting that you can have a conversation with the gods where they explain that they have been in control of the wheel for so long that if control stops, the wheel will stop. So essentially what Eothas is proposing here is that mortals, Kith, and gods need to come together to work towards a solution in the face of the truths of the world, and the fact that these gods are in fact manufactured rather than anything real per se, or essentially all of existence is going to be wiped out. Eothas also takes this moment to explain that this was the purpose of him using Widewin, who was an avatar of Eothas, who actually was just a farmer, but Eothas contacted, and ultimately became the avatar to Eothas during the Saints' War that happened prior to the first game. Eothas explains that this entire Saints' War was actually also to this end, that he was planning on using the Saints' War to gather forces to march on Ukaizo to do the exact same thing. Now, at this point, the other gods are basically actively about to attack Eothas in an attempt to stop him. However, it's essentially too late. He knows that they're not going to be effective in doing so. Now, luckily, in order to get us out of this situation, Eothas kindly escorts us out by keeping us safe from these attacks, where Magrin will of course blow up all of the volcanoes around you. Andra, the goddess of the sea, tries to drown you out, that kind of stuff. But ultimately, all of this fails, and Eothas is able to place you safely back on your boat. However, you lose consciousness while you, luckily, get your soul back from the inside of Eothas' statue that he's been using. After all this happens, we finally awaken inside the Kahanga Palace throne room in Nekataka. Apparently our companions sailed us back here, and we've been out of it for quite some time. Now, this is ultimately a meeting of all of the factions in the game. That is to say the Huana, the Principe, the Royal Deadfire Company, as well as the Valent Trading Company. They will all have an argument about how to reach Ukaizo in the face of the fact that Eothas is going there to destroy the wheel. They feel they need to get there to try to help or stop him, one or the other. And at this point, all of the factions make it very clear that they will no longer tolerate any back and forth. So at this point up to the game, you were able to go back and forth between helping one or the other or all of these factions. But now essentially you have to pick a side, and then that side will help you reach Ukaizo. There is a fifth option where you can go to Ukaizo on your own. However, this requires your ship to be upgraded to the maximum. So essentially your choices are side with one of these factions and help them reach Ukaizo, or get your ship upgraded to the maximum point by going and finding the upgrades and then heading to Ukaizo. And that is where we are going to leave part 3. We finally found out what Eothas was stomping across the archipelago for, and it is our goal to reach Ukaizo now to stop him. And in the last episode, which will be the next one, we are going to explore all of the options to get us to Ukaizo and the ending of Pillars of Eternity to Deadfire. And it is in this next video that I will go through kind of all of the things you can do for these factions, which are technically side quests, but obviously you can see it plays into the main story here. As a quick side note before I let you guys go, in addition to the faction side quests, I will be explaining the ending of one of the DLCs that is also part of Deadfire. Not because it's important per se, but it does have some relevance to the ending of the Pillars of Eternity series, at least as far as our Watcher character here is concerned. So technically, for the sake of the game, we are playing the same Watcher from the first game as we are in this game. And one of the endings of the DLC, Beast of Winter, in Deadfire here, has very relevant information as to what happens to the Watcher, which is why I'll be covering it at the end of the next episode as well. With all of that out of the way, Thank you guys so much for watching. I cannot thank you enough. The channel wouldn't be here without you guys. I mean, it would be, but I wouldn't be getting any views. So the community is really all you guys. So again, just thank you guys so much. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day. What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you our final part in our Pillars of Eternity 2 Deadfire story series. Last we left off, in part 3, we needed to find our way to Ukizo, where Aothis was headed. And in order to do that, we can either gear our ship up and get ready for that journey, or we can side with one of the 4 factions available in the game to help get us there. Now, with a piece of the Watcher's soul being inside of Aothis, we're going to use that connection to track him to the exact location of Ukizo. Because through several side quests, we can learn the approximate location, but most people already know that it is meant to be somewhere past Andra's mortar and Magrin's teeth. So, in this particular episode, we are going to cover all the various ways and means you can side with these factions and then reach Ukizo. Now, a couple of things I do want to mention at the start of this video. A lot of these quests are very interconnected and they are very reactive. I'm not going to mention every single possibility for every single quest. I'm just going to try to give you the broad strokes answers. Because, for instance, we're going to get into this in a bit, and you're watching a story video, so I'm going to go ahead and assume this isn't going to be a spoiler per se, or at least that you were expecting a spoiler. We're going to get to a part about stopping some slavers here in a bit. The Valent Trading Company doesn't care what you do with these slavers, they just need the situation resolved. The Rauatai, or the Royal Deadfire Company, want the slavers wiped out. The Principe want you to cut a deal with the slavers. The Huana wants you to recruit the Oaxaca Tribe, which is in direct conflict with the slavers. Regardless of how you play that situation out, that is not the lockout moment for any of these factions. So you can do basically the opposite, and while it will negatively affect your reputation if you do something that one particular faction doesn't like, it will not actually lock you out of the quest chain until you reach the lockout moments for each quest chain, or if you do something crazy like go on a murder spree and kill important characters or something, that will obviously lock you out pretty quickly. But my point being is there's a ton of interconnectivity and reactivity. So A, I couldn't mention all of it if I wanted to, more than likely. And B, most of it is honestly irrelevant to the overall plot, which is really what I'm trying to get across here. So with that point out of the way, let's jump right into the first of our factions, the Huana. The Huana are the ruling government, shall we say, of the Deadfire Archipelago. Now the Huana are actually a shadow of what they used to be, which was a dominating empire. So around the time of the Inguithans, who eventually became the gods, so millennia ago, the Huana were actually one of the strongest peoples around. And the Inguithans actually took advantage of that and used their resources to build the machinery that we mentioned from the last episode. Now what the Huana do still have going for them, and how they can potentially help you reach Ukizo, is that they are water shapers. That is to say, they can effectively move water. Like think, I hate to make this comparison, but honestly the best comparison is like water bending from Avatar: The Last Airbender. It's exactly like that. They can 100% do all of that stuff. But in order to get into what the Huana can do for you, we first have to help them. As with all of these quests, you can actually start doing them at the beginning of the game, and then they unlock a little bit after each major plot point that we've covered in previous videos up to this point. So keep in mind, a lot of these quests you can do at any point in the game. You don't actually have to wait until the end of the game. But jumping into it, the first thing we're going to do for the Huana is we're going to solve a pirate problem. This is typically one of the first things you do in the game after reaching Nekataka. But the prince mentions that they have a pirate problem, and he's going to send you to investigate in the gullet. So after prodding around, you can eventually find your way to the Undercroft of Nekataka. And basically, apparently some rogue water shapers have been helping the Principe smuggle goods into the city. How you wrap up this quest affects the endgame with what happens to the Roparu in the gullet. The Roparu are the lowest caste of Huana society. So mostly all of this quest affects is pretty much what happens to the gullet. And beyond that, it's not super important to the main plot, so we're moving on. So after this happens, we get a much more interesting quest, which is we're being sent after an expedition that the prince sent to an island called Motero Cozy, I think is how you pronounce it. I could be way off. But either way, he sent an expedition to that island looking for something, and they never returned, so he sends you there. When you show up, you are immediately threatened by members of the Oaxaca Tribe. The Oaxaca Tribe are very aggressive, isolationist members of the Huana. The Huana, of course, being made up of many tribes that ultimately all are under the umbrella of the Huana. In talking to them, however, if you choose to talk to them, you can find out that they are not responsible for the death of the expedition that was sent here. In their own words, the forest here has gone mad and killed the expedition on its own. So going forward, we can find out that the Oaxaca were pretty much in the right on this one. The forest here, through its Delmegan avatar, shall we say, has gone a bit insane. It seems to think it's healthy, but what it actually is rotting to the core. If you're a druid, you can actually cleanse this forest instead of fighting it, which I thought was a nice touch. But ultimately, in this forest, while you're at it, and what the expedition was actually after, was a early map of Ukaizo in relation to the other islands in the Deadfire archipelago. Now, your character mentions that it's not something you could use to chart a course, but again, it gives an approximate location of where Ukaizo would be. But again, most people already know the general gist of that anyway, so this isn't actually super helpful. Now, once we have this information, we can take that back to the prince, and he tells you that from here you're going to be working with the queen instead of just him, which is where we come to dealing with Queen Onikaza again. Now, the rest of the quests that I'm going to mention after this point, you actually have to have progressed a ways into the game to do for the Huana, that is. So the next major quest here is dealing with the Water Shapers Guild. As tensions begin to rise between all the factions, Queen Onikaza makes the very prudent move of trying to get her Water Shapers ready for what is probably going to be an inevitable conflict. So she summons them. However, they're not answering her summons, and she sends you to the Water Shapers Guild to investigate. This is honestly one of the cooler quests in the game, which you'll see why here pretty soon. When you get to the Water Shapers Guild, it's been attacked. There's a bunch of dead people. You investigate, you find some Water Shapers who explain that Naga have come up from the lower depths of the guild and began attacking people. The Guildmaster went down there to resolve the situation. When you make your way down and you reach the Guildmaster, she explains that the Naga have attacked and they've stolen her Rod of the Deep Hunter, which you're going to need to get into a door. She explains that there's something going on in there, it's very pressing, and it needs to be dealt with quickly. She unfortunately succumbs to the wounds that she sustained and dies. So we get this rod from the Naga that had already taken it. Then we go to the door she was speaking about. We solve a little puzzle with a song that she gave us. And when we enter, we find none other than this sea dragon. It turns out that Pareki, I don't know how to pronounce it, the first water shaper who actually turned the art form into like a teachable thing, actually lured the sea dragon here and captured it after the covenant that the Huana made with Andra, the goddess of the sea, which is what allows them to waterbend, was broken. They needed a power source from somewhere else. So originally the dragon was just a guest. But after that covenant was broken, the dragon was basically forcefully bound to the Water Shapers Guild. Using some magic, they bound the Water Shaper forms to this cell. So when Water Shapers are actually doing their water shaping, they're no longer calling on the power of Andra herself. They're actually calling on the power of the sea dragon against its will. With the recent rumblings in the Deadfire, the prison the dragon was in was starting to loosen up, and it was able to call Naga forth to come free it. Now ultimately, your decision here is a big one. You can kill this dragon outright, you can strengthen the wards that keep it imprisoned, you can free it. There is another option where you can actually, as a watcher, use your abilities to make sure only part of its soul stays imprisoned, so it's free to leave, but the Water Shapers can still call upon its essence to continue to do their work, which is ostensibly the best option for the Huana anyway, because this dragon gets freed and is no longer, angry about being trapped. Also, the Water Shapers can continue what they do, because if you just free the dragon the water shapers will no longer be able to water shape, which is going to leave the Huana not defenseless, but close to it, because they're a relatively primitive tribal people otherwise in comparison to the other factions. So this is a big one. To reach Ukaizo, you need water shapers. That's their whole thing. So while it is still possible to continue with the Huana after this, it is difficult to do so. Now, this next part will actually only trigger depending on when it was supposed to be triggered. So if you wait until the end of the game to do all of the quests I just mentioned, you actually won't be given the recruit the Oaxaca Tribe part of this quest. For whatever reason, I don't know exactly what triggers it. What's supposed to happen next after this quest with the dragon is that you are sent to go recruit the Oaxaca Tribe for the Huana. That is, bring them back into the full fold. This ties in with the slaver thing that I mentioned earlier, because that slaver quest and all its interconnectivity is typically the end and the point of no return for a lot of the factions comes right after that. However, for whatever reason, if you wait until the end of the game, this doesn't seem to trigger appropriately for the Huana, and a couple of the other factions have some weird interplay if you wait until the end of the game for it, so just a quick note. But that's what would normally happen next. But after all that is done, the queen outright asks you, basically, if you are ready to commit to siding with the Huana and reaching Ukaizo. And this is the real point of no return for them. So if you agree to it, any companions that are against this will leave your party. And if you deny the request, your dealings with the Huana are pretty much done. They're like, all right, well, too bad then. So you pretty much have to pick another faction after that if you deny it. Should you accept it, what actually happens next is the Huana want you to sabotage the Valent Trading Company and the Royal Deadfire Company. You accomplish this by infiltrating a Royal Deadfire storehouse, blowing it up, and implicating the Valent Trading Company. And then reporting back to the queen, whose territory it is, so she settles the dispute, is basically like, yeah, this is on you guys, and she pits them against each other, effectively taking them both out in one fell swoop. And then after that, you sail to Ukaizo with the Huana. Let's move on to the Principe. So the Principe are, of course, the pirates of the Deadfire Archipelago. Now, the first quest you are given is actually called Blow the Man Down, and it is all about getting revenge on the pirate that attacks your ship at the very beginning of the game, Benwith. You are stopped after you leave Port Mage by a Captain Ferrante, who explains where you can find Benwith, and that basically you'd be doing him a favor by killing him as well. So you can go to Fort Deadlight, which is where Benwith is, and then that quest ultimately concludes with you either killing or sparing Captain Benwith. I would say most people are going to kill him because he's the worst. After this, once this quest is completed, Captain Ferrante will eventually contact you by letter and ask you to come visit him in Dunnage, the pirate city. He's got some work for you if you're interested, and if you go see him, he'll explain that recently several of his ships and people have been attacked by a seemingly ghost ship that they are calling the Floating Hangman. And he tasks you with digging up some information about it. So he sends you to the Temple of Barath in Nekataka, where the rival of the supposed captain of the Floating Hangman, Lucian Riven, supposedly was laid to rest. A guy named Aesir the Barbarian. And basically, you just need to go get some information from this tomb, basically anything you can, if there is any, to find. So once we go investigate this tomb, you can find out that the guy we're looking for had actually been turned into a death guard, which is to say he's an undead knight with all of his faculties in service to Barath. So he has possession of a sword that you're ultimately going to need for this part of the quest to continue. Not this particular quest, but you will need it later. You'll need to convince him to either give you the sword peacefully or kill him. It doesn't really matter which way you go with this, to be honest. And in addition to that, we're going to pick up some eulogy tablets, which will also give us more information about what is going on with Aesir here. This barbarian guy and Lucian, or whatever her name is, had a rivalry, shall we say, in life. And eventually, Lucia died and became a death guard herself. And Aesir followed her across the end of the world, really, until he was eventually killed and turned into a death guard himself. And now, he guards the sword that the other woman was so desperately after. Like, that sword is her whole thing. She just really wants that sword. But he has it, and it is his death guard duty, shall we say, to guard it and keep it out of her hands. But you can convince him to give it to you. And once you have all that information, you can return to Captain Ferrante. And he'll basically start exploring ways to use that to his advantage to take control of the floating hangman. Because the pirates' plan on getting to Ukaizo is to take control of the floating hangman. Because what it'll actually do when it shows up is it clears all the weather, which means it can make it through Andra's Mortar, which is a giant storm on the way to Ukaizo, by simply using magic of the floating hangman to just dispel the weather around you and make for smooth sailing. Now, once this is done, you will be sent by Captain Ferrante possibly to go deal with the slavers, like I mentioned earlier. Now, preferably, Ferrante wants the slavers to continue their business, which you may or may not agree with. However, you resolve that quest will not lock you out of the Principe, like I mentioned earlier. But after this, you will be forced into a decision with the Principe, because what I haven't mentioned up to this point, because I was waiting to do so, is that you will ultimately get to decide the leadership of the Principe between Captain Ferrante and Captain Aeldus. The Principe is actually split into two sub-factions, the Old Blood and the New Blood, shall we say. Captain Ferrante leads the Old Blood, that is, pirates with principles, shall we say. And Captain Aeldus has the New Bloods. They're all about just, killing and plundering for the sake of doing so, as opposed to Captain Ferrante doing it as a means to an end. Captain Benwith actually served Captain Aeldus as her second in command. Back and forth between all these quests I've mentioned, you can actually report to Aeldus and Ferrante both and kind of give them information as you so choose. But ultimately this comes as a head because, you can't have both of them trying to go to Ukaizo. So Captain Ferrante will ultimately call a meeting where, using his position as top dog of the Principe ultimately, to call for the execution of Aeldus, which you can then either carry out or kill Ferrante, and basically you decide the future of the Principe with this quest. After which, it will be revealed that, and kind of during, honestly, that they have the information they need to find the floating hangman, using the sword that ideally you've already picked up to this point from the Death Guard in the Hanging Sepulchres, where we did the quest in Nekataka earlier. We can use a special phrase, which is like a motto or something of the paladin Lucia used to be, which will call the floating hangman to your location if you say that oath while holding the sword she's after. Now, regardless of which captain is alive at this point, this is what happens next. So if you don't have the sword already because you didn't get it earlier, you will have to go back to the sepulchres and get it. And then once you have it, all you've got to do is go out to sea on your boat, go down to the actual deck map, and then click on the sword from your inventory, and it'll have a Speak the Oath option, where you can then, of course, speak the oath. And then you will be in direct confrontation with the floating hangman. You can convince this to end peacefully if you have the options, but most often you're going to wind up just fighting it out to the death. And I'm going to use this battle as a time to mention this. You're probably going to notice that I am just absolutely cleaning house and even one-shotted Lucia herself. That is actually not a bug or a cheat or anything like that. That is just a genuine one-shot. Undead are considered vessels. My ranger is using a weapon called the Red Hand, which has a special enchantment you can put on it called Double Tap, where if that weapon makes 2 consecutive hits on the same vessel target, it just immediately dies. In addition to the Double Tap enchantment, the Red Hand rifle also has an effect called Double Barrel, where it shoots 2 projectiles at once. So those 2 things combined means that if both of those projectiles hit a vessel target, it immediately dies. So to be clear, this is actually the highest difficulty that I'm playing on. What you're seeing is the Red Hand in action. It is ridiculous. It's such a good weapon. That aside, once you take control of the floating hangman from the Death Guard, what you're supposed to do is head back to Captain Ferrante, which then locks you in with the Principe. That is the point of no return. Once you return the floating hangman to the Principe, that is it. You are sided with them at that point. and then you head off to Ukaizo with them. You can get the floating hangman and then just never report back to the Principe, thus effectively taking the floating hangman. And we'll talk more about that later, because it is going to come up in the last section. For now, we're going to move on to the Valent Trading Company and the Royal Deadfire Company. So the Valent Trading Company are just merchants, essentially. They come from Old Vela. They use their money and wealth to influence, what they do. And essentially, they are in the Deadfire looking for luminous Adra. The Valent Trading Company is all about animancy research. Animancy being the study of souls. And in order to study souls, you need the essence of what those souls go through when they're headed to the afterlife, which is Adra. So they are there essentially to harvest luminous Adra, which is a very valuable commodity of late in the last couple years since the first game. The Royal Deadfire Company works for a nation called Rauatai. They are in the Deadfire Archipelago ultimately to assume military control of the place. They're all about their military. They have a very strong navy. The secret thing they're actually looking for is a means to stop the storms that are basically constantly assailing their home place of Rauatai. So Rauatai got to where they are by basically enduring just impossible conditions in their homeland. Rauatai is constantly racked by storms, very similar to the storms that seem to be causing Andra's mortar, which is what their goal in the Deadfire Archipelago is to establish control and then study these storms. Both the Valent Trading Company and the Royal Deadfire Company actually start the same way. They both send you to deal with a settlement named Tikawara and a ruins called Poko Kahara. This quest was actually heavily used in the promotional materials from the game and is probably the most recognizable quest because of that. But both of these factions start with this quest. The Valent Trading Company sent an expedition looking for luminous Adra to a place called Poko Kahara, and they stopped at a village called Tikawara on the way, which is where it's suggested you go to look for information first because no one knows exactly where Poko Kahara is. So you go to Tikawara, you investigate, you actually find a member of that expedition there who got sick the day before the voyage and, couldn't go. You talk to them, you talk to the local Huana tribe nearby, and they say that, this expedition came through, they left a couple weeks ago and then just never came back. And since they left, there are actually storms that are covering the island of Poko Kahara to the due east area of Tikawara. And, you're free to go there. The leader of the tribe will actually give you a key, which is why it's recommended you stop by Tikawara first. In addition to that, like I just mentioned, he'll give you the exact location of Poko Kahara, which is just due east from where you are now. If you do a little more digging from the information you're given, you'll find that the storms are supposedly a curse on the island that started recently. According to some members of the tribe here, that basically they didn't like outsiders and the sea is angry about outsiders going to the ruins. So from here you can sail to the ruins, you explore, because it's an abandoned island for the most part. You can start exploring, you find your way into the ruins, you find through your watcher abilities and things like that the expedition is mostly dead because a member of the crew seems to have went crazy. You'll eventually work your way down and find her body as well as her journal and things that describe what happened, as well as a small idol to Andra on her body. And then from here, we can finally reach the Adra pillar, but it's corrupted. And once you interact with it, a portal to the inside of the Adra pillar opens up. And if you go through it, you find yourself in the in-between. This is where things get interesting. You run into a member of the expedition that was sent to Poko Kahara, as well as the old spiritual leader of the tribe on Tikawara. Essentially, it turns out that the spirit of the old spiritual leader from Tikawara has been causing the storms. He did so by basically getting himself killed, not intentionally, but once he was killed, he used his own soul to stop the Adra pillar from doing what it does and channeling souls. And basically, it is overflowing with souls and is rotting because they're not flowing like they should. So you're actually forced to fight this guy. It kind of seems to imply you might be able to talk your way out of it, but you can't. You're going to have to fight this fight and kill all of these souls. And once you do, and they're all dispersed, you can decide whether to destroy or save the Adra Pillar. Now, this is the difference between the Royal Deadfire Company and the Valent Trading Company for this. The Valent Trading Company wants the Luminous Adra, so you should restore it if you're siding with them. The Royal Deadfire Company wants it destroyed because that way the Valent Trading Company can't have it. Either way, regardless of your decision, the storms from the island will actually clear, because that's what was causing the storms as well as corrupting the Adra. So once you've made your decision, if you sail back to Tikawara and you speak to the new spiritual leader, which is actually the daughter of the old one, you can show her the idol you found on the expedition, and it turns out that that woman cursed that idol, gave it to the expedition, which led one of them to go crazy and start killing all of the other expedition members. This woman did this because, unlike her tribal leader, who welcomes outsiders and the trade they can bring, she was mad about outsiders being here, and she is essentially a reason that entire expedition died. So do with that information what you will. After this, you can report back to the leaders of each. The Royal Deadfire Company, while disappointed if you didn't destroy the Luminous Adra, what they are much more interested in is the fact that once you did or did not, or just dealt with that situation in general, that the storms around Pococahara cleared. Because as I mentioned, that's their main goal for being in the Deadfire. Valent Trading Company is just happy you restored it and they can open up lanes of travel. So, focusing in on the Valent Trading Company from here. After that quest, you will be sent to investigate some smuggling, where you can find out that the Royal Deadfire Company has been supplying Principe with weapons to attack the Valent Trading Company. And you can also help with some animancy research. This is where we find out that Valent animancers have actually been experimenting with teleportation between Adra pillars. Essentially, using soul energy, they've been able to open up portals between one Adra pillar to the next. It's still in its infancy and it's not working very well, and you can take part in those experiments and kind of get them where they need to be. After all of that is sorted out, we can then be sent to deal with the slavers, again, like I mentioned. The Valent Trading Company actually doesn't really care how this plays out. They had a potential revenue source from the slave trading there. However, if you decide it's probably better to cut losses, they're fine with that as well. Basically, they just need the situation handled so their involvement isn't found out, or at least doesn't look too bad. So the Valent Trading Company is actually probably the most fine with whatever happens to the slavers. Once that is dealt with and we come back, we will be asked to sabotage the Royal Deadfire Company for the Valent Trading Company, which is essentially the same thing that the Huana wants you to do. However, this time, instead of framing them, the Valent Trading Company is just actually doing it. Now, this is the point of no return for the Valent Trading Company. If you have Mayo with you, which is the ranger for the Royal Deadfire Company, she's obviously not going to be a fan of that and she'll leave your party. But once you've dealt with that situation, the Valent Trading Company's way of getting to Ukaizo through the storms is to actually use their animancy teleportation. They're going to bring an Adra pillar onto a ship, and then you're going to teleport from that Adra pillar to an Adra pillar on Ukaizo, which is how they get you through the storms. Now, circling back to the Royal Deadfire Company. They're actually probably the most straightforward people to work with, actually, in terms of the quests. So once you deal with Pococahara, you'll be sent to a place called Sayuka as a courier. Sayuka is a research facility for the Royal Deadfire Company where they're clearly working on something. In your role as a courier, you'll find out that whatever that is involves a spell that was recently created to recycle air. Some woman has mastered a spell to recycle air, and whatever that is, it's important to the research going on in Sayuka. In Sayuka, you will be given some kind of busy work, really, to help the research station. You don't really find out exactly what they're doing unless you're really good at, using some inference clues. They do not ever come out and say what you're actually doing. What you wind up doing quest-wise is simply helping problems around the research facility. For instance, they are being attacked by druids from the island who aren't happy about their presence there, as well as there being a problem with some sort of facility nearby Sayuka that is emitting energy that is just blowing up animals and stuff to like insane sizes. And you'll be sent to deal with that, which actually turns out to be an old Nguithan ruin under the dominion of the god Galawain. And you can resolve that situation literally however you want. It does not make a difference for the Royal Deadfire Company. You'll lose some reputation if you don't do what they want, but it doesn't matter otherwise. And then after that, the Royal Deadfire Company will send you to deal with the slavers as well. Now, the Royal Deadfire Company want the slavers routed. They want to establish control over the archipelago, and doing that will A, get rid of, slavers being a nuisance, but also it will endear them a bit to the Huana that are, locals, not necessarily the crown, but like the actual Huana people. So the Royal Deadfire Company wants you to go wipe out the slavers, which you can do for them. And then after that comes the point of no return for the Royal Deadfire Company. Theirs is probably the most radical in terms of like end games. So what the Royal Deadfire Company want you to do is actually go assassinate the Huana leadership, which is the prince and the queen. You don't have to kill the queen if you choose this option. You can kill the prince, and then if you don't kill the queen, she just like runs away in exile, basically. But they want you to kill both. And once this is done, again, if you have anyone aligned with the Huana, say Tekehu, they will obviously leave your party if you do this. Once you return to the Brass Citadel, which is the Royal Deadfire Company headquarters, they unveil what they've been researching, which is actually a submarine, or the first version of a submarine in this world. That's why they were looking into recycled air earlier. And they're going to get by the storms guarding Ukaizo by going underneath them, which is how they get to Ukaizo. Now that pretty much does it for actual factions. However, there are two other ways to get to Ukaizo. Both of them involve just going by yourself. One of them involves the floating hangman, and the other one involves upgrading your ship to the maximum level. So, because we've already discussed the floating hangman and the fact that it is incredibly straightforward, as I mentioned earlier, when you actually take control of the floating hangman, you are not locked into the Principe option until you take the floating hangman back to Dunnage. If you instead just take the floating hangman straight to Ukaizo, or just, sail around, do whatever you want to do, and then when you're ready, go to Ukaizo without ever going back to Dunnage, you've effectively betrayed the Principe by using their information to take control of the magic ship that will get by the storms to Ukaizo, and then just cutting them out of the deal. So that is the easiest way to get there by yourself. The other option used to be easy, but no longer is. So the other option of upgrading your own ship to the absolute maximum used to be really easy. Prior to one of the, I think, DLC patches actually, you could just buy the upgrades from the shipwright in Nekataka. They were very expensive, but that was it. You could just buy them. However, one of the DLC patches actually changed that. What you need are the Dragonwing sails and the Blackwood hull. After this patch, they moved the Dragonwing sails to a very high-level part of the map, as well as turning the Blackwood hull into a crafting recipe. So, Blackwood logs are very rare. There's only like 6 or 7 of them in the game. You need 5 of them and a ton of gold to craft the Blackwood hull. And you have to do both of those things to upgrade your ship to the max, to then use your own personal ship to sail through to Ukaizo. Because that's such a pain, it's honestly easier to just get the floating hangman and then use that to sail yourself through to Ukaizo. But those are the two options for just taking yourself there. At some point, there's not an exact moment for this, but at some point through all of this, as you're getting ready to go to Ukaizo, you're going to speak to the gods as they stop you on your ship, and they're going to be a bunch of back and forth about what to expect on Ukaizo, and the main two things you're going to get from that conversation are there is a guardian that guards the gates of Ukaizo that you're probably going to have to fight. And by probably, I mean you're going to have to fight it. In addition to that, they also spill some really cool lore about the Godlike. So the Godlike are technically a race of their own in Pillar's lore. So the Godlike are essentially normal fetuses and stuff that were touched by gods in the womb, thus becoming godlike. So because of that, you'll find godlikes of basically all statures and stuff of other races. So there are Skane godlike, there are Andra godlike, there are Magrin godlike, there are Bareth godlike, all of that stuff, and they all come in various shapes and sizes because, again, If two Orlans have, you know, a kid that winds up being touched by Gallowayne, they're going to give birth to a nature godlike. Some societies see it as a blessing. When you get like a Skane godlike, he has like a mutilated body. A lot of people see that as a bad omen, and the baby is often killed. The lore that they give you about these godlike is that the gods are actually capable of harvesting their godlike's souls to give them more power. So for instance, if say Magrin needed more power for some reason, she could just like, you know, snap her fingers and all the fire godlike, or as many as she pleases, would just die, and she could reabsorb them for power, which is just a big lore reveal that they wind up not doing anything with in this game at the very least, but just, you know, there you go, there's the information. Now, once we actually sail through to Ukaizo, which involves a scripted event that plays out through the random adventure text stuff, once we actually get to Ukaizo though, we are going to be immediately confronted by the Guardian. We can use the opportunity to speak to the Guardian, who can tell us a little information about Ukaizo, but it's nothing we wouldn't have already learned up to this point, that the Nguithans came to the Huana Empire, basically tricked the Huana into building the machines. The Huana thought they were something different, but the Nguithans knew that that was the machinery that they were going to use to take control of the wheel. You can learn all that from the Guardian, should you so choose, but you can learn it from other sources up to this point. Here you're going to fight the Guardian. So this is the last boss. Technically, like, go crazy. There is one fight after this, but it is not the last boss. This guy is the last boss. Fairly decently tough fight. It's like 3 phases, but it's not too bad. On lower difficulties, it's actually pretty easy. On Path of the Damned, you know, you got to pay attention to what you're doing, like, you know, the hardest difficulty, so that's pretty much expected anyway. But, you know, kill the ads, then kill the boss. That's pretty much the strategy. Now, once we put down the Guardian and we can actually enter Ukaizo, we need to make for Andra's Pillar, where we can shut off Andra's Mortar, which is the storms. So we can hit a button that shuts off the storms, and in doing so, actually stops the storms on Rawatai by default, which is kind of interesting, I guess. From here, we can have a conversation with all the members of your party that you've brought with you. They'll have some things to say. You can have a nice touching moment. And then when you come down from the spire, you are going to be attacked by whatever leader is still alive that you slighted the most. So this has nothing to do with what faction you sided with. It has to do with what faction leader you slighted the most. So for instance, I sailed here with the Floating Hangman for the sake of wrapping this up. And in doing so, you've effectively betrayed whichever captain of the Principe is alive. For me, it happened to be Captain Ferrante. And you'll be forced to kill them. And if you've beaten the last boss, this fight should be, you know, not difficult at all, really. So, once you kill these guys, you can go to the part of the city that Aothis is actively destroying, which is, you know, the part that houses the machinery. And then you can go have a conversation with Aothis. Some of the conversation options here will affect an inslide. You can basically ask Aothis, like, you know, to do certain things after he destroys the wheel to, like, help make things easier for people. And that will affect the end. The end is, in fact, that the Watcher of Cadnua bears witness to Aothis destroying the wheel. And the gods are basically like, well, I guess this is what it is. We're going to have to figure it out. Because in destroying the wheel, Aothis has officially stopped the cycle of reincarnation. The wheel did exist before the gods. They have controlled it for so long that once it's destroyed, it will no longer work again. It's not going to like magically go back to its pre-god state, where it just did it by itself. And then, of course, we see the end of the game with all of the slides that represent the actions you took throughout the game. And this is going to vary by, like, you know, person to person, so it's hard to say exactly what you'll get. But the general gist of it is that the mortals are going to have to deal with the wheel being broken. So what this means in logistical terms is that there's about a generation or two from now where people will no longer be born anything but Hollowborn. So Hollowborn are people who are born without souls, which is what the wheel actually gives people. After that point, people will still be born, but they'll be Hollowborn. They won't have a soul. They'll essentially be just empty husks of people. So essentially, mortals have a generation or two to figure out another solution or work with the gods to find another solution that works for everyone, as Eothas wanted. Now, I actually mentioned this a couple times, I believe, up to this point. I did want to mention something about what happens to the Watcher in the Beast of Winter DLC. I firmly believe that Pillars of Eternity 2 Deadfire is the end of the Watcher of Cadnua's story because of what happens in that DLC. I'm not going to spoil it, just in case anybody wants to go play it, or I do separate videos or something at some point. The Beast of Winter DLC ends with the Watcher trapped and having to have a conversation with Rimmergand. Beyond that, I'm going to leave it pretty wide open. In order to escape where he is trapped from, the Watcher of Cadnua has to make a deal with Rimmergand. Rimmergand is the god of entropy and true death, like an end to all things. No reincarnation, no nothing. Rimmergand makes a deal with the Watcher that in order to escape the place that he's trapped in, Rimmergand is going to, after this life, essentially give a true ending to the Watcher's soul. This life will be his last, his or hers. So, because of that, I think that this is going to be the last game of the Watcher's cycle for Eora as well. I think this is going to be the last game for the Watcher as far as this series and franchise goes. Now, of course, we know Avowed is coming already, so there will be more Pillars of Eternity. However, I think this is the end of the Watcher's story. And personally, I thought it was really good. That's going to wrap it up, guys. There it is. There is the story of Pillars of Eternity 2 Deadfire. I did Pillars of Eternity 1 already, so there's the story of these two games. I really hope you guys enjoyed it. This last one was a lot of work, so hope you like, comment, subscribe. Please stick around. I plan on doing more stuff like this in the future. The channel is doing really, really well. So honestly, just thank you guys so much for watching. Cannot thank you enough. Maybe even think about joining the channel as a member. That would actually help out a lot as well. But regardless, thank you so much for watching. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.